Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to this episode of the Podcasting Secrets Show. Today, I am joined by Brent Thomas, the host of Paranormal Portal. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Thanks for joining us, Brent.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Brent receives on his show between 60,000 and 100,000 downloads per month. On YouTube, he has more than 14,000 subscribers. He's done some pretty cool things with monetizing and growing his reach. And I'm excited to hear Brent's story today. Brent, can you start off by just sharing with us a little bit about you outside of podcasting? Ignore podcasting and Paranormal Portal and tell us something interesting about you.
But I am the podcast. What do you mean? Well, I've had an interest in the paranormal and all this all my life. I've done many different things. I was one of those guys that I've tried a lot of different things. I worked in factories. I worked in offices. I worked in sales and construction, and I've done a lot of everything. And so I've done IT, computers, et cetera, and even was a corrections officer at one point. So I've had a pretty robust career of many different paths, and I enjoyed all of them, but I never really felt like I had found where I belonged. I always consider myself a really late bloomer and I remember growing up and knowing friends of mine that knew from a very young age what they wanted to do, and no kidding, they went on to do it, and their path always seemed really clear. And I was one of those oddballs, and maybe that's not as odd as I think it is, but it was just knowing people like that and then feeling like I was just adrift in life. It felt awkward to me, but I finally, did figure it out, and I've been just having a ball ever since. But I'm a husband, a father of 3 boys, live in the north of Idaho, and I'm a Minnesota transplant. So I knew you Minnesota people, School Vikings. And
that's so funny. You and I are in the same state, but we're in different time zones.
Well, let me know how the future goes, Nate. You're an hour ahead of me. So, but yeah, I mean, I've had kind of an eclectic life, I guess, but, oddly enough, I'm really, even though I do this for a living now, when I'm left to my own devices, I'm very much kind of a hermit, which is kind of funny, but I wouldn't say I'm reclusive, but I'm just a very comfortable, solitary person in my own space. So I guess there's kind of a dichotomy in me.
Yeah. It's amazing how many introverts have turned to podcasting, how it's a channel that they feel very comfortable with. How do you feel about podcasting? Does it fit well with that personality type?
It seems to for me, and I can only look at it through my own lens, but it's not that I'm, ever opposed talking to people. I'm just, a solitary person, but I do find that it is very much a creative outlet. Like, this is, of course, what I do for a living, but it was first, long before it was ever a living, it was a passion. And so it was really phenomenal to find that place for me and where to focus these creative energies and how to bring a message out there that I think is important. And I've really felt extraordinarily honored by it, but I think it does help. If I was just looking at it from the 30,000 foot view, being more introverted, I think it's good to have a place that you can express more in a more extroverted manner that isn't, maybe as threatening, because you're doing it in your own vacuum, in your own bubble. Right. So I think there's merit to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now tell us about your show.
Okay. So the Paranormal Portal is an exploration into all things paranormal. And when a lot of people, when they hear paranormal, they think ghosts. That's ghost stuff. But paranormal by definition is anything that's not normal. And so that includes ghosts, that includes UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial encounters, that includes cryptozoology and these undocumented or unverified species that may or may not live around us, and it includes strange phenomena like time slips and other oddities, like everybody's heard of the Mandela effect. Well, that's falls definitely within the realm of paranormal. So I have a pretty robust umbrella in which to operate from. Like I'm not. That's the one thing I really like about it, is I'm not chained to one thing. Like, if I named my show Bigfoot Adventures, well, then I would be very much chained to that, and that's fine. But I like that I have the ability to, have a broad spectrum of topics and things that I can discuss on the show. So generally speaking, the Paranormal Portal is two very different shows, though. You mentioned the YouTube, and the YouTube is where I do the live streams. Now, there are plenty of shows out there that they do a YouTube show and then they port that over to a podcast. And so they kind of cover both bases, but my YouTube presence is very much different than that. And I do that in more of a paranormal variety show, if you will. We cover the news, we cover various articles of strange phenomena, we cover cryptids in every episode and all of this. So I try to cover a lot of bases to appeal to as broad an audience as I can. First and foremost, I'm interested in all of them, so it's not disingenuous, but it's also, I know that there are certain camps in all of this. Like there's the Bigfoot people. They want to know all about Bigfoot, but if you're doing an episode on the Rendlesham UFO incident in England, well, they might not tune in. So what I've decided to do is try to create a robust episode of a lot of different segments. And but the podcast is very much interview based, where generally speaking, I'll talk to either experiencers themselves, where they'll share their encounters, or I will be talking to authors who have researched and done books on the topics, or media personalities, people from like Amy Bruni, George Norrie has been on my show, several different people from the more celebrity end of the spectrum, to researchers themselves, people that are out there looking for answers and they want to bring their ideas to the board. And so the podcast episodes are generally 45 minutes to an hour. I found that that's kind of my sweet spot. And I do one topic per show, and it's basically an interview. So I think a creative spectrum there that I work with, but it seems to work out well for me.
Yeah. Let's talk real quick about a couple of those paranormal things you talked about. I'm here looking them up because they're things I've never heard of before. Talk to me about the Mandela effect.
Okay, so the Mandela effect is basically, it's an idea that there was a whole segment of the population that was sure, they were absolutely confident that they heard that Nelson Mandela passed away in the 80s. And so he was no longer around. However, he wasn't. He was very much alive and was released from prison and went on to live. I don't know that he's still around, but he went on to live quite a few years past the 80s.
He died in 2013.
Yeah, so it's not that long ago. But there were so entire segments of the population that said, no, I remember watching the funeral. I remember. And so what people have found is that there's whole areas of these incongruities of our recall of the history. Now, such as Snow White, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, became Magic Mirror on the Wall. The Berenstain Bears became the Berenstain Bears. There's very polarized ideas about what it was versus what it is now. There's many people that remember references in the Bible of the lion laying down with the lamb, which is now the wolf laying down with the lamb, and people can't wrap their heads around it. What happened? So there's all kinds of various ideas, like, did certain segments of the population kind of do a dimensional jump, and that's just one of the breadcrumbs that are different between this and another version of reality, or what? But the skeptics to that will say, well, those are just memory recall, errors. It happens. It's very natural for humans to misremember events. And, but the proponents of it would say, yeah, memory recall could certainly work on an individual or a small sample basis, but for entire segments of the population to have a different memory of events from the past versus what they are now, So it's the idea that something changed somewhere, and there's these little oddities that surface and those are referred to now as Mandela effects.
Interesting. I've never heard of that before. Uh, Talk to me about time slips. That's another one you've talked about. Is that like time travel?
Kind of, but generally speaking, they are one of the more famous examples of time slips is a certain alleyway or store area in Liverpool, England. This is the one that's come up a number of times for several experiencers, and they will be walking along this modern shopping area of Liverpool and suddenly find themselves looking at storefronts from like the 1920s or something like that. Like they just took a step into a different layer of time, and they'll be absolutely beside themselves seeing like old bookstores where now it's a fashion shop, and stores where they know the location to are no longer there, and instead there's these older examples of it. People are dressed weird suddenly, the cars are old fashioned, and then boom, suddenly they'll be back in their normal time. Another example of this was I think it was a couple of retired school teachers from England were over in Versailles. I think it was Versailles, and they were walking around doing a tour of the palace, and they ended up turning a corner in at this palace, and suddenly they were in the courtyard where Marie Antoinette was there with her party, and they looked at her and saw her, and she looked at them, and there's this shocking moment, and then boom, they were back in their normal time. They both swear that this happened. So that would be an example of a time slip. Like suddenly
Okay.
people find themselves aware or participating in a different layer of time than the one they should be in.
Is that common? Has that happened a lot?
Well, it's happened more frequently than you'd think, but I don't think I would ever call any of the paranormal common.
Yeah.
It's certainly uncommon events, but they are so far removed from what we understand as quote unquote normal.
Which topics bring your show the most traffic? Which episodes, you know, really go viral for you?
I wouldn't say that it's any one type of episode. It just depends. I think honestly, and you do a podcast, so you understand this. I think it has more to do with how well the episode went
Yeah.
than what was necessarily the topic. Because sometimes you just really click with a guest, and it takes on a life of its own, and the discussion just is this organic, expanding thing, and it's a pleasure to listen to. I've done other shows where I thought that the topic would be amazing, and I felt awkward going through it, and sure enough, the numbers seemed to reflect that more than what I was discussing. It was how well the episode went.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting observation. What ideas do you have for us? What takeaways as to how we can help the interviews go better so that they can do better?
Well, I think anytime you interview someone, you have to be genuinely interested in what they're saying. Like it's not just a matter of paying attention. It's a matter of getting involved in what they're talking about. And because I don't ever can interviews, I never send an interviewee a list of questions. This is what I'm going to ask you. Be ready. I only have conversations.
Yeah.
Because I am genuinely interested in this, but I found, and I get a lot of feedback from listeners. It's like, I really love listening to the show. It's like I feel like I'm sitting around a campfire with you and your guest and just taking part in this wonderful conversation. And I take a lot of pride in that. And I just think when you can an interview, you're going to get a canned answer, and it's very mechanical.
Yeah.
And it kind of lacks that heart and soul of a genuine conversation with, surprising ideas come to mind and you throw them in there. So I think you really got to be interested. You've got to be engaged. There's some people that do shows where they introduce the show, the person talks, and then they come in and close the show. And so I think that leaves a bit of a vacuum, for the listener to not be as emotionally invested in what happened. So be interested, be involved, and, take part in the conversation as much as you can.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. When you first were getting started as a podcaster, can you tell us about that journey and tell us about some of the mistakes you made or some of the hard challenges that you faced and how you got through them to where you are
Well,
today?
the beautiful thing was by the time I started doing a podcast, I'd already been doing the internet radio show for a couple of years. So that helped a lot because I wasn't cold going into broadcasting, just like, well, there's a mic, let's start talking. But I made a lot of errors back in the day. And there were several things that I picked up along the way that I think really, really helped to shape what I'm doing and to shape how the audience perceives it. One of my horror stories was my very first show. Nathan, I thought I knew the paranormal. I was just like, I know this stuff. I can do a show about this standing on my head because I've always been interested in this stuff my whole life. So I was like, yeah, just turn on the mic. I'll roll. And I was all ready to go. And it was a live broadcast and it was a 2-hour show. My first show was going to be 2 hours, which probably was plenty stupid because that's a big bite right out of the gate. But I was like, okay, let's go. And I was waiting there in the studio back end, waiting, watching the thing. And it's, stand by, stand by, stand by. And I had pages of material. I was so excited. And it was going to be a great, great show. Then the on-air button happened. And I hand to God, I panic read about 3 hours of material in about 20 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? And the only saving grace was the guy that owned the station. He was listening. And so we hit a break. He called and said, how's it going? I'm like, oh no, I'm in trouble. I just read through everything and I got nothing left. He goes, do you want me to come on? He was a very seasoned broadcaster. So he came on and got me through the rest of the show. And I just realized, there's no accounting for the nerves. You just, there's definitely an issue when you're first starting out with just your nerves, just to find your pace. Now, I learned to find my pace was probably the first big thing that I did learn. The next big thing and revelation for me was realizing that you have to project a personality into this. Like, people don't get the opportunity to know you outside of these little windows into your world, but you've got to present them with probably maybe even a little exaggerated version of yourself, but you got to put energy into the shows. Like, I think we've all listened to people that just kind of drone through it and their energy is real low and they're just like, yeah, and then we're going to talk about Bigfoot next. And it just, it's like listening to a bad physics lecture in high school, you're just, oh God, when is this over? So I find that you have to get excited about your own material. You have to get excited about what you're doing and you have to portray that because I've found that energy, it's reciprocal. The audience will be as involved to the energy level that you give them. And so I think it's important to, put it in, hey guys, I may not be feeling really good that day. I might be just have had a hell of a day. But when that mic goes on, it's like, hey guys, I'm so glad you're here, and you just dive into it and you try to be fun and engaging and give people something worth watching. And one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given personally, I had a bit of a mentor in Wes Germer of Sasquatch Chronicles. And he said, if you listen back to your shows and you don't like listening to them, how can you expect anyone else to waste their time listening to them? If you're not really, really putting out the best thing you can and feeling really good about what you're doing, you're not doing it good enough. You can do better. And that was great advice. So, all of these things were huge hurdles to me personally, but once I found my voice, it was so much better. I was just, I know who I am now. I know who I am to my listeners as well. So
today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is brought to you by Pod Allies, the done-for-you podcasting services solution. When I speak with CEOs about their podcast, one of the most common comments that I hear is that they know they need a podcast, but they don't have time. Have you ever wondered how some businesses find a way to still run their podcasts while juggling their crazy day-to-day operations? The secret might be simpler than you think. Let me introduce you to Pod Allies. This is a service that's changed the game for businesses in the podcasting world. Pod Allies is a done-for-you podcast production and marketing service. They understand that while many businesses understand the immense value podcasting can have for their business, finding time to produce, syndicate, promote, and monetize a show can be challenging. Pod Allies offers a dedicated team to handle virtually all aspects of your podcast production. From strategy and branding to audio and video editing and guest scheduling, they've got you covered. They even take care of creating blog posts, transcripts, and syndicating your content across multiple platforms. What sets Pod Allies apart is their use of PodUp, their proprietary podcasting software suite. This allows them to streamline the entire podcasting process, saving you time, effort, and a bunch of money. If you're ready to become a thought leader, connect with your audience, and grow your business through podcasting without all of the investment of time and cost of doing it yourself, Pod Allies might be the perfect solution for you. To learn more or to schedule a free consultation with a podcast expert, visit podallies.com. That's podallies.com. Now back to the show. Yeah, great advice. Let's dive in real quick to your show and some of the topics you cover in your show. And maybe you can tell me if you think they're real or not real and why. Okay. So you just mentioned Bigfoot. So real or not real and why?
Real.
And tell me why. And give me your reasoning behind it.
My reasoning behind it is that it doesn't surprise me a lot that there's still undiscovered species out there, even as large as that. A lot of people sit in their paved roads and their manicured lawns, and they can't fathom the idea that there's an 8 or 10 foot large primate running through North America. It's like, well, we've been here forever, haven't seen those things, but some people have. But this would be the only continent on the planet Earth that doesn't have a great ape of some kind, or a large primate. There's so much evidence that has been collected, even in the terms of anecdotal evidence. And a lot of time that gets dismissed, but there's a whole sampling of experiencers that have come face to face with this stuff. And I'm not just talking about Joe Bob down at the trailer park. I'm talking doctors, lawyers, law enforcement, professionals, judges have seen these things, biologists have run into them. And so there's such a huge spectrum of people that have said, I saw it, it's real. It just stands to reason to me that these people are seeing something, they're experiencing something. Now, we may not understand the full nature of it. There might be a lot about it that doesn't make sense to anything else we know. And what does that mean? I don't know, but there's ideas that Bigfoot could be supernatural and can step in and out of this reality. And those are way out there. But what we do know is there's been thousands of tracks that have been cast. And many of these include dermal ridges. Now that's the patterning like fingerprints, but that are on our feet. We have them as well. But the dermal ridges that were mapped and captured very much correlate to dermal ridges on the large primates, not like us as humans. So there's so much out there. There's hair evidence that's been captured. There's potentially scat that people have managed to collect. I don't want that job, but there's so much out there. So many thousands of people encountering these things every year, and those are the stories we know about. Well, then you consider how many people have seen this. I'm not ever telling anybody that. And
I think I'm crazy.
Yes, exactly. I'm not going to be that guy. And fair enough. You can't ask somebody to wear that mantle. If they've got a career or they've got a professional responsibility and suddenly they're seeing Bigfoot, it's not quite socially acceptable. So I really think they're out there.
You raise a really good point. Sometimes podcasters say, well, some people are going to think I'm crazy if I do this show and if I cover this topic. But actually covering the controversial topics sometimes are the ones that bring the most traffic, right? Where you're willing to talk about the things that other people aren't talking about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the last thing you want to do is when you're doing a show is to do the same show everybody else is doing, because then it's just a matter of comparison. So you've got to differentiate yourself. And sometimes it's talking about the the lesser traveled roads.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, UFOs, real or not real?
Very real. I've seen them. I've personally seen them. I was explaining to you a little bit about it, but I've seen a flying saucer. Especially, with the soft disclosure that's going on, the Tic Tac craft the Navy released. Well, I don't know if they released as much as it was exposed, but the footage from the Nimitz off of California from 2014
Yep.
and off the East Coast, there's just it seems hard to believe that's hard for people to digest, because space is huge.
Yeah.
What are the odds we're the only things going on in trillions of stars and quadrillions of planets through the different galaxies? I mean, that we're it. That to me seems so much more hard to believe than there might be a lot of different advanced lives out there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. With the evidence that I've seen, it seems more realistic that there
Yes.
is life than that there isn't. I think it takes more faith to believe that there isn't than that there is at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay, Loch Ness Monster, real or not real?
That's a tough one. It seems to me personally less likely. When you're dealing with Loch Ness, it's not like it's a crystal clear lake. It's very murky. I grew up on the shores of the Mississippi River and saw logs do really crazy things, waterlogged logs that will kind of come up and surface and then submerge. But the fact that these stories persist and people continue to see things not only there, but Lake Champlain and Ogopogo, and there's so many large bodies of water that claim that they have some kind of water monster, like a Loch Ness monster. Now, is it a plesiosaur that somehow managed to make it? I don't know. I mean, that part I couldn't say. I think people are seeing something. I will tell you this, though. That I used to watch that TV show River Monsters with Jeremy Wade, that white-haired guy, that fisherman.
I haven't seen that. Is that about alligators?
No, but he goes to all these exotic locations and he catches things that very well should be cryptids. He catches these tiger toothed huge fish down in Africa and South America, and he pulls out lunker catfish that are like the size of a boat out of freshwater areas, even in the US. And so I think there's probably some gargantuan fish that might be very mundane in their species, but their size might just be anomalous.
Yeah.
So is it possible that some of this is that? Maybe. I mean, Loch Ness has a pretty robust eel population, and so there's a lot of people that have guessed or speculated that what people are seeing is possibly a very large eel, and it could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a harder one because the reports don't come in as often on those, but there's been certainly some research efforts into both Lake Champlain and Loch Ness that show some incredible radar hits. They hit something under there that seems to be moving around, and it's enormous, but is it a Loch Ness monster? I don't know.
Okay. You've grown your show to an awful lot of downloads per month, up to 100,000 downloads per month. Can you share with us some of your best secrets and strategies for growing, promoting, marketing a podcast?
Well, marketing is a tough one, and that's one that I don't know if I've ever cracked it. I've been working at it, and I've been largely successful in my endeavor so far, but there's certainly a lot of room to grow. So marketing, I would say, was probably, even though I used to work in marketing, was a very different kind of marketing. But I think probably the biggest advice that I would always give would be to harken back to what we were talking about before, and that is put yourself into your shows, put the energy in, because and a lot of people fall in love with like, well, I need this microphone, or I need this camera, and I need this kind of equipment, and then my show can be good. But there's plenty of people doing podcasts that are incredibly good off of just run-of-the-mill laptop stuff.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't get back to the equipment. It gets back to the quality of what you're doing, the episodes, the love that you have for it, and the energy you put into it. I did take a few notes of things as far as tips. The first one, I think I think the first one I wrote down is probably the most important, and that is love the topic that you're doing a podcast about. You gotta really like it, not just because, well, that'd be a good niche topic, maybe people would listen. If you don't love it, it's gonna fall apart sooner or later. I know so many people since I've been in this world that have just come to the conclusion they're going to do a podcast too, or a YouTube channel, and they just figure all they got to do is hang the sign out and people are going to show up, and it's just not enough. I mean, you're whenever you're doing this stuff, you're in an incredibly competitive environment where people have a lot of times TikTok level of attention spans. So you got to hit them quick. You got to get them quick. And love what you do. So don't just narrate things. Don't just talk. Get involved energetically, personality wise. Get involved in your shows. I always tell people when they're planning on starting, remember this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
You know, this is not going to be like, hey, like I was referring to before, I put a sign out. Everybody's going to be coming. You're going to be at it for a while before anybody even notices what you're doing. So use that time to hone your craft, to, hone your messaging, hone your format, and try to make it as engaging and interesting as you can. The other big piece of advice that I have to offer is if you want to know how to model your show, oftentimes one of the best things you can do is go and watch shows you love and pay attention to what they're doing and how they're doing it, and grab that as a bit of a inspiration to how you're going to do it. I don't think it's ever good to just like, I can't be Joe Rogan no matter how hard I try. I'm just never going to be Joe Rogan. But I can look at how Joe Rogan does his show and try to add some engagement similar to that, and to create an atmosphere like that people obviously love to watch. So those are some of my best tips, I think.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. How about monetization? What have you done that's helped you make money the best from your show?
Well, I think in terms of monetization, one of the biggest things is I guess you've got to be able to appeal to brands. So you've got to, when you're doing your shows, you've got to make yourself brand friendly. In other words, you have to present your show in such a way as, companies looking at making that investment will go, yeah, I'd like our messaging there. I think that would be a good fit. I like the way they're doing things, and it would help us to be there. Rather than being more awkward and maybe largely inappropriate. Some people that works out for, but I think you got to make yourself brand friendly if you want the brands and businesses to invest in what you're doing. And so pay attention to that. And, again, I don't know, I kind of fell into that part automatically because I already had an established platform to a degree. And when I first started podcasting, I was able to leverage what I had done on YouTube towards doing a podcast. And I think that really helped me, and it put me in a position where I was able to monetize right off the bat. Although, fair enough, I didn't make anything for a few years, like 3 years. I hardly made a dime. But, getting involved with companies that will help you, like I'm signed with Libsyn, but, and that's a company that will go out and find programmatic ads that play during breaks, and they will hunt for sponsorship opportunities and host read ads. And that really helps. They take a lot of the heavy lifting out of that for me. So I'm very fortunate, and they're always looking for new talent too. So, that's always an option.
So Brent, how do you keep the show fresh after hundreds of episodes, and how are you planning to continue to evolve this show?
Well, I think it's something that's necessary though, to a degree, unless you found that golden formula that just always work. And again, the Joe Rogan type of formula, his formula is largely unchanged, but I think you've got to evolve what you're doing as you grow and as you expand. You've got to, before I said it's not really important about the equipment. However, once you figure out your formula then the equipment might help in terms of sound quality, because that's certainly going to help scale your show. I try to always re-examine my shows in how I'm doing things, look for new topic areas that I haven't touched much, and we'll look for guests regarding that. I just think it's important to evolve, because there's so much competition. You're competing against, thousands or millions of other podcast opportunities. And so you've got to continue to make what you're doing interesting. And maybe this harkens back to, if you don't love your shows, you can't expect anyone else to. Well, if you get bored of doing your own shows, chances are people are going to get bored of listening to you. So keep trying to reinvent the format. Maybe it's as simple as music. Maybe it's as simple as how you do your breaks if you're doing ads and things like that. But just keep making it fresh so that people feel that you are continually investing in their experience. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. What discovery tools do you use to find those new trends to talk about?
Certainly I use the search engines, look at,
like Google News, that kind of thing.
Yeah. See what's been hitting, what people have been paying attention to. Certainly, one thing I kind of slept on that I probably should have acted on more proactively was like the Jersey drones. I mean, they were all over the news, and sure enough, everybody and their brother, every show was going to be Jersey drones, this, drones, that, and it was really a hot topic. Now, I don't know. I do try to also avoid really, really trendy stuff, because I think it helps when your content is evergreen, meaning that if I record a show now about Bigfoot, even in 20 years, that should be interesting, because this is still a topic people are following. But if I do it about the Jersey drones, and that was a 5-minute event, or 2-week event, and then it was over, well, then it becomes dated.
Yeah.
So I think you always try to gear towards evergreen content.
What did you end up believing the Jersey drones were after all the information came out?
Well, I think the big takeaway for me personally was that I think the whole thing really hurt the field of UFO investigation, because now every reference to lights in the sky is a drone. Well, that's not very sensational, right? It's a drone. So it already harkens to, well, it's something somebody up here threw up and was flying where they shouldn't have been, rather than, well, I wonder if that's from this star system. So it automatically kind of, I think, really, really threw a monkey wrench into the whole UFO field, because now everybody's referring to all of these anomalous lights and craft
as just drones.
That's a drone. Yeah. So that's my big takeaway. Now, what were they? I think it was probably a hodgepodge of things. I think that perhaps they were some kind of governmental things, because there was a statement released saying they were looking for something. It wasn't more clear than that, but that does seem to suggest they were looking for something. And but I don't think that speaks to everything that people saw in the skies. But everything just kind of got lumped together in that, because that was the hot topic.
Yeah. A lot of conjecture, maybe, that it was a dirty bomb material or something that had been out in the country.
Yes, exactly. A lot of that stuff was going around, and who knows? I mean, obviously they're not ever going to tell us, but I think that there was probably plenty of UFOs that were in that mix too, but they just got thrown into the drone bin.
Yeah. Okay, Brent. If our audience has enjoyed this episode like I have, and they'd like to know more about you and your show and your business, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Probably the one best stop you can make if you want to learn more about the Paranormal Portal is my website. It's paranormalportal.net. And that is kind of the backbone for everything. It has links to both my YouTube, to the podcast episodes. It has links to my social accounts, which is, Facebook, Twitter, or X, and TikTok and Instagram, everything. It's all linked on there. So that's kind of a good overview of all that I'm doing. But if you are an experiencer and you wouldn't mind coming on the show and being a guest to talk about what you've been through or what you've seen or been through, please email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or go to paranormalportal.net and hit the interview me button that's on there, and that will automatically open my calendar app where you can sign up for dates and times that I set aside for interviews. So,
sounds great. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brent.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, brother. Thank you for having me.